Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to today's webinar, Supplier Quality, Do You Have an Effective Program? My name is Amy. I'm a member of the marketing team at Perry Johnson Registrars Food Safety, Inc. I'll be facilitating today's webinar and offering technical support to our speakers. Today, we're excited to be welcoming back a familiar face and voice to our webinars. Peter Begg of Hearthside Foods. We'll be introducing him to you shortly. But just before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping notes. To ensure audio quality, all of our attendees are on mute, but we do want to take any questions you might have. So you can just type any questions you think of in the questions tab of the GoToWebinar control panel and click send. We'll answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of the prepared slides. Some of the most frequently asked questions we get include, where can I get the slides, or is a recording going to be available? And I'm happy to say that both the slides from today's presentation and a recording of the broadcast will be made available. The slides will be on the PGRFSI website, and the recording will be posted to the PGRFSI YouTube channel for you to review or share with anyone who couldn't attend live. This is just what it might look like on your screen with the questions tab. If you click the triangle to the left-hand side, it should pop open this little panel here where you can type a question and send it in. Now I'm going to go ahead and introduce our moderator, so to say, for the session today, and that's Paul Demarin. He is the Senior Vice President of Food Safety and Supply Chain here at PGRFSI. Paul joined Perry Johnson Registrars Food Safety, Inc. last year and has over 35 years of experience in the hospitality, service, and retail agri-food sectors. Paul is also a board member of the OFPA, that's the Ontario Food Protection Association, and he's also an advisory council member with the George Washington University School of Business for their digital marketing certificate program. Before he came to PGRFSI, Paul worked for 17 years in the certification industry with clients in every sector from food safety and supply chain to brand protection and quality. Paul also worked for many years in management system certification, and prior to that, he was a professional chef and a consultant for over 20 years. So Paul, I'll hand things over to you and you can take it away.
Thank you very much, Amy. Welcome everyone today to our webinar. Thank you very much for attending. We really appreciate that. I'm extremely excited for today's webinar. I know Peter Begg very well, and he's a true expert in every sense of the word. I think we're all in for a real treat here today. As many of you know, I have altered the format of our webinars and will now be jumping directly into the session. So let me go ahead and introduce you to Peter Begg. Peter is currently the Vice President of Quality and Food Safety for Hearthside Food Solutions, or HFS. He oversees all aspects of quality and food safety across the company, including risk management, regulatory and food safety conformity, as well as product compliance for the business. Now, Hearthside Food Solutions provides contract manufacturing solutions across the food industry to numerous large CPG companies. Peter joined HFS from Glanbia Nutritionals, where he was the Vice President of Quality and Food Safety for 3 years, from 2017 to 2020. And while at Glanbia, Peter led the quality team across the entire network of ingredient plants, including the quality control labs. And prior to Glanbia, Peter was the Senior Director of Global Supply Chain Quality for Mondelez International from 2012 to 2017. At Mondelez International, his responsibilities included auditing supplier quality, sanitation and hygienic design, Lean Six Sigma for quality, distribution and warehouse quality, policy and training, and quality systems. And before that, Peter was the Director of Quality for Kraft Foods Europe from 2008 to 2011, and the Director of Research, Development, and Quality for the Kraft Food Service Away from Home business in North America from 2005 to 2008. Through Peter's 27-year career, he's worked in a variety of business roles, including engineering, R&D, and quality. He also represented Mondelez International on the Global Food Safety Initiative Board of Directors from 2012 to 2017. He's completed his BS in Chemical Engineering from Pennsylvania State University in 1994. And with that, Peter, again, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to be coming back to you throughout the presentation to interact and ask a few questions. But at this point, thank you so much, and I'm going to pass it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Paul. And you don't have to put the year of my graduation on there. You're starting to give away my age. So next time you can just say I graduated. So that would be appreciated.
Point noted.
All right, well, welcome everyone, and definitely happy to be joining today. As Paul stated, I'm the Vice President of Quality and Food Safety for Hearthside Foods. And I believe I have access on the slides here. So let me see. Amy, do I have access to move the slide? There we go. So let me talk a little bit about Hearthside Foods, where I work today. So as Paul mentioned, we're a very large contract manufacturing partner of many CPG companies. Hearthside has grown significantly through acquisition and organic growth over the last 12 years. We now have over 38 facilities around the world, 34 factories in the US, over 10,000 employees. Definitely one of the largest contract manufacturing firms in the United States. So what does Hearthside do? So we have 4 major platforms across the business where we manufacture finished goods for many of the familiar companies that you know. We have a packaging platform that does things such as reassembly, bulk packs for like Costco and Sam's Club, repackaging of grains and other materials for CPG. We also have a platform that does bars, so nutrition, energy snack bars, many of the ones that you would find in your local grocery store. We also have a baking platform that does cookies, crackers, and other components. So we have a number of facilities with a number of ovens and sheeters and dough enrobers, et cetera, that perform the baking. And then finally we have a USDA fresh frozen refrigerated packaged foods platform that makes products that you would find at places like 7-Eleven and Starbucks. So very diverse set of platforms, but really touches every part of the food industry in terms of the companies that we work with. So this is just a quick map to show you where all the different plants are across the US. As I mentioned, we have 34 in the US. We have 4 in Europe outside of Amsterdam where we do bars. And then you can see very high concentration in the Midwest, but also have some plants on the West Coast and East Coast to service our customers. And again, fairly equal split amongst the platforms. Our largest would probably be the USDA fresh frozen bakery, or fresh frozen refrigerated, but the other platforms also have a number of facilities to service our customers. So that's a little bit about Hearthside, but let me talk a little bit about our quality management approach. And we really look at things across the supply chain. So this is a slide that I've used before in my career, and I really like it. So it's one that I shamelessly steal and take with me. But it really shows the importance of how you work across the supply chain to handle quality and food safety for your organization. It really starts with the design. How are you designing the products? How are your customers, in our case, designing their products so that they meet the right quality and food safety requirements? Includes things like how you manage allergens, how you do design and sanitary design of the equipment that you're using in your factory. And then it goes into procurement. We'll talk more about that today around how you decide on the suppliers that you use, what are the supplier quality expectations that you set with them, how do you audit them, do you perform any COA verification? And then you get into the meat of it, which is obviously the manufacturing and conversion, where I'm sure many of you on the phone deal with, but it's things like, do you have specifications? How are your good manufacturing practices, incoming material controls, traceability, et cetera. And then you get into the actual distribution of the material, which again, depending on, especially having refrigerated frozen products, we have to make sure that we have very good distribution controls. Do you have temperature controls in your warehouse? How are those monitored and verified? Are all critical aspects of your distribution. And then finally, you have the customer or the consumer. And how do you handle complaints when you get them? How do you handle feedback? What happens if around labeling, and how do you make sure that you have the right label? So we really look at the quality management approach is something that really spans the supply chain, and hopefully it's something that you focus on as well in your organization to make sure that you have each aspect covered, because all it takes is one miss and you could be into a serious quality or food safety issue. So just a little bit more around this. So what do we mean by risk assessment? and especially as we'll talk today more on suppliers, it's really how do you understand the risk profile of your suppliers? And it's not just the traditional microbiological, but it's things like their ability to service you. What about fraud? Food fraud is something that has to be considered when you're looking at a risk. What's their financial risk? Do they have the ability to manufacture and supply the raw materials that you need on an ongoing basis? Then we have HACCP, making sure that we have the right preventative controls. Obviously, in the United States with FSMA, and with Canada, with the CFIA and all the regulations that have been enhanced in the last decade, making sure that you're focused on prevention, identifying what are those risks, and then monitoring the compliance of that is absolutely critical to your food safety program. Then you have third-party validation. So this would be your third-party audits with folks like PJR, as well as any regulators that come in. Many of our facilities get visited by the USDA or FDA or the state regulators to look at our key systems. And so that making sure that you do that assessment up front is absolutely imperative to ensure that you have a strong foundation in your system. But then becomes the management piece of it. And so you set up your program, you make sure that you've assessed it appropriately, but then you get into the management, which is the actual execution of your program. So, how do you audit? And this includes both internal and external audits. So, we have an internal audit program that we want to be audit ready every day, regardless of who's coming into our facility. So making sure that we're compliant to the policies and the programs that we have set up. Talked about raw material testing and verification before, making sure that do you have an incoming material program to verify the effectiveness of your preventative programs? You obviously can't test every raw material, but do you have any sort of surveillance testing or COA verification to really let your suppliers know that you're watching? Training is absolutely critical with the amount of turnover we have in the food industry, especially in manufacturing. Making sure that you have strong training programs, it will enhance your organizational competency. Traceability becomes critical when you have a food safety issue, making sure that you can ring fence the materials that you're using, ring fence the finished goods, and really control them and stop them from hopefully getting to the marketplace if there were to be an issue. Specification management I talked about, and then you get into risk mitigation, which is what happens when there is an issue that occurs, and do you have a strong company-wide process to manage those issues? Do you have clear definitions of who's responsible for what when an issue occurs? When I was at Kraft Foods and Mondelez, they called it special situations, because crisis implies that something is out of control. So in a situation where you have a food safety incident, do you have the right process in place to manage that effectively and minimize the impact to the consumer and the customer?
Hey, Peter, I've probably worked with close to 1,000 companies to help them build out and develop their programs as well. And I often hear sometimes the same question from industry, and that's what organizational support do you need for a strong supplier quality program? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, Paul, that's a great question, and it really has to come from the leadership. It has to be cross-functional, but also has to be top-down support. Quality is not just quality's responsibility, and I even see that at times in our organization. Well, someone will say, well, that's quality's job. Really, it's everyone's role in the organization to drive the quality systems and the quality program. So you absolutely, if you don't have support from the senior management, whether it be, in my case, I report to the chief operating officer, making sure that he's aligned with what we're doing with that program, but also cross-functionally. So if you're not partnering with your procurement organization or your supply chain organization who are purchasing and handling these ingredients, then you're also going to have challenges with managing and making sure that your programs are intact and executed in the right way to ensure that you minimize the risk. So it has to be a really broad-based, leadership-focused, cross-functional effort to make it effective.
Great, thank you.
So what I really wanted to then talk about is how do you look at what do you need to consider in your supplier quality program to make it effective? So we talked about the overall supply chain and the ways that you manage risk, you assess risk. But now let's talk a little bit more, dive deeper into supplier quality. So with supplier quality, the first thing I would ask is, do you have a policy? Do you have a supplier quality expectations manual or a policy that you send to your suppliers to make sure they understand what are the expectations that you expect from them? Do you have a clear list of quality requirements that your suppliers must meet? So obviously the policy and the manual set out sort of the overarching areas that you want to make sure the supplier is meeting. But then do you have a specific list of requirements, whether it be, you need to see their HACCP plan based on, depending on the material. You might want a pure food guarantee. You might want to see results of their last third-party audit. A number of different things that you may want to have addressed in your supplier approval process, but clearly, do you have that list of requirements spelled out so that you're consistent and that your suppliers know what you will be asking for? And then with that, do you have a formal supplier approval process? When procurement identifies or purchasing identifies a new supplier, do you have a formal process that takes those expectations and requirements and then has someone in the organization who assesses the supplier against those requirements to make sure that they meet your needs? So once let's say you approve of a supplier, now how do you look at your suppliers from a risk standpoint? And I said earlier, it's not just about the traditional microchemical physical, but things like financial impact. You may have a very small supplier that's used a low percentage, but the impact to your organization would be dramatic because it's potentially used in, let's say, all of your products or your finished goods. And so that would be a high-risk supplier because of the potential impact to the organization. Country of origin, I mentioned food fraud before, and is it coming from a place in the world where there's economic distress or there's other challenges that could cause people to commit fraud when they're bringing the item into your supply chain? And then how do you handle food fraud with those high-risk materials? Are you doing any sort of identity or purity? Are you doing, as I mentioned earlier, any sort of surveillance of those raw materials on an annual basis to ensure that you're getting, the supplier sending you what you expect and you're getting the right material in the right fashion? Because again, on food fraud specifically, I tell people, when you see a shortage of a high cost ingredient, that's when you have to start to look for fraud and be on high alert that a supplier or someone may try and make an economic gain out of the situation. I mentioned this earlier. Do you perform CO verification on some frequency for your high risk materials? So here you get into things like the micro and the chemical. So if someone claims something's gluten free, do you do an annual gluten verification? On physical, Prop 65 has created a lot of expectations. Do you do any sort of heavy metals annual surveillance? Micro, do you do COA verification on any of your pathogens that may be required on your COA? So really thinking through, once you risk tier your suppliers, what do I need to do now to manage and measure that those suppliers are meeting my expectations? And then when an issue occurs, do you have a formal notification process for your suppliers? Do you have a simple form that you have the plants fill out so that they can come back and say, oh, here's the issue I found. I found a foreign material, or I found something that was the wrong ingredient, or I had a hit for some sort of microorganism. Do you have a notification process? And making sure that that is in partnership with procurement, so you can go back to the supplier, request a RCA and CAPA, and hopefully manage the issue in the right way. Then with your suppliers, do you have a disapproval process? So what happens when you have a failed audit, or if you have repeat quality problems, or if you have a food safety issue for that matter? Do you have a process that you disapprove a supplier, or you require them to do extra testing, or whatever it may be? But you should have a process in place that when an issue occurs, how do you manage that with your suppliers? Do you perform on-site audits? Again, not everyone has the resources to do it. That's why you have folks like Paul and their organization who can support people in actually going in and auditing your high-risk suppliers. But do you have a program for that? Do you look at your high risk? And typically, I would say, at least from my experience, high-risk suppliers are somewhere in that sort of 10 to 20% of your supply base. A lot are going to be in the medium, and then some in the low risk. But in that high risk category, do you perform on-site audits to, again, verify the controls and the programs that that supplier has? And then do you have KPIs or key performance indicators for your suppliers? Really making sure that you're measuring them, whether it's service, whether it's on-time arrival, all those things. But it's also, how many quality issues have you had with that supplier? Do they pass their audits with flying colors each time? And do you have a clear set of measures that you use to make sure that, again, your poorer performing suppliers, you either get them to correct those issues or in some cases have to disapprove them and look for an alternative. So that's just a short list. I probably didn't cover everything, but at least it gives you a sense for what are some of the key questions you should be asking as you look at your supplier quality program and making sure that you have in place.
Peter, I think these are all extremely important steps to consider when building the program. Now, obviously this takes commitment and resources to execute. So what kind of staffing do you typically have for a supplier quality program like this? Because this is obviously a very robust one.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, Paul. It first starts with, do you have someone who's accountable and responsible for supplier quality? In the case of Hearthside, I have someone on my team who's responsible for supplier quality. Again, depending on the size of your organization, it may not be a full-time dedicated resource, but somebody needs to be responsible for supplier quality. But again, if you look at an organization like the size of Hearthside, we have a few people who really manage this program overall, collect the right documentations against our requirements. I've always said that, for a high-risk supply base, rule of thumb roughly is about one quality person for every 75 high-risk materials. If you're thinking about, potentially going on site and auditing, about all the different documentations you need. So, a larger organization may have a supplier quality group of 8 to 10. When they're buying 800,000 raw materials, which I've seen in some of my previous organizations. But I don't know that there's a magic number per se, but it starts with really having someone who's responsible and accountable to lead and drive the program for you. And then you really need to assess and say, can I get the work done through a third party like PJR? Do I want to add my own resources? But it does take some amount of funding from the organization to make sure you're doing this in the right way. I always say that you need to be effective first in your management, your food safety management program, whether it's supplier quality or others, and then you drive efficiency. So the first step is, let's get effective at this, let's get good at this, and then we can start to look at the efficiency aspect. So, but yeah, there is some funding and resourcing commitment needed to be successful.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, all right, there we go. Well, I went too far. How do I go back? Previous, all right. So some of the documents I mentioned earlier, what are kind of some of the information that you're looking for from your suppliers? So here's some examples. And again, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it's to make sure that when you're working with your suppliers and understanding what it is you need from them, do you have the right information to do a formal risk assessment that you believe is thorough? So things like product specifications. Again, most suppliers will be able to provide you this. Making sure that what they're sending you is what you expect for that finished good or that sub ingredient. A pure food guarantee could be a good document to have. Copy of most recent third-party audit report. Again, some companies may or may not send this to you. They may require a confidentiality agreement or an NDA. But again, this helps you understand, like, how did they perform in their last third-party audit, their last GFSI audit? And what were the corrective actions? So did they receive a major or a critical? And if they did, what have they done to address that? Especially for higher risk ingredients from a micro or a chemical standpoint, what's their HACCP flow diagram? What's their CCP summary look like? How are they mitigating the higher risk on their end? Do they, for some ingredients, do they have a kill step, a proper heat step or kill step involved to make sure that the material's safe? Obviously, allergen information is critical. Are they handling any allergens? Is the material itself an allergen? Do they, is it used on the same line or manufactured on the same line as other allergens? Are all critical pieces of information that you'll want to have. Halal and kosher are very important for some subsets of the market, and making sure that you can get the right certification of your finished good. So you have to make sure that your ingredients have that same certification. Looking at a typical COA, what do they put on their COA? What are they testing for? Do you need to ask them to add additional analysis depending on what you need for your finished product? MSDS, this is more from a human safety standpoint, but there are, is there anything like, is the material skin irritant? What happens if you breathe it in? All those things are important because, people safety and food safety are the primary priorities for any food manufacturing corporation. And if it's not, then you need to ask why that isn't the case. Genetically modified or bioengineered certificate, is anything in the manufacture of the ingredient sourced from a genetically modified source? And that's something that obviously is becoming even more critical in the United States with the BE labeling requirements that are coming into effect. Certificate of origin, again, I mentioned earlier about where the material comes from could have an impact on both the risk but also potential for fraud. And do you have a certificate of origin that that coffee bean you're buying from is actually coming from Colombia and not someplace else? Packaging specifications. Again, depending on the type of ingredient you're bringing in, the packaging of it could be critical. If it's a liquid or something that's frozen, do they have the right packaging so that the material arrives intact and with high quality? I mentioned earlier Prop 65. If you're selling into California or buying an ingredient from California, that could be something that's important. And then understanding the shelf life of the material. How long is it good for? And if you have something that's nearing shelf life, does it still maintain its quality and food safety? So making sure that, again, for your materials, especially those that are high risk or have a high impact, have you understood from the supplier what the shelf life and how much will they warranty on that shelf life? So again, just a subset. I'm sure there's other ones that I may have missed, but this gives you at least a starting place to look at the different types of documents you'll want to consider for your supplier management program.
Peter, based on this list and certainly your expertise in the industry, are there any specific documents that you find are often missing when companies, initially build out their program?
Yeah, Paul, it's a great question. I would say that third-party audits sometimes are challenging. Some suppliers don't want to provide them. Some may only provide you the summary document, which again, if they have had a good audit, it may be sufficient enough. But the other is also the HACCP flow diagram and CCP summary, because again, they can provide you all the other documents, but if it's a high-risk ingredient, you want to understand how they're controlling the hazards. How are they? What preventative controls and CCPs do they have in place? And so there's been times where I haven't seen that information as well as thorough as it probably needed to be to give comfort. Because if you're combining ingredients, and let's say we make bars, nutritional bars, well, there's no kill step. You're just basically blending ingredients, sheeting, forming, and then creating the bar shape. You're cutting and forming the bar shape. Well, you have to rely on your ingredient suppliers to control the hazards, especially around micro and chemical with allergens. So those would be two that I think at times are not as strong as they need to be. And then also specifications, I would just mention in the sense of, do they have a thorough, really good detailed specification, or is it just pretty generic and it makes it hard to make out if there's additional questions you may need to ask?
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, so just want to share a couple of examples of supplier quality issues I've dealt with in the past. And again, things that you should consider as you're setting up your program. Micro failures. One of my previous organizations, we had a company supplying materials from China that was going into a blended material that did not have a kill step, and they didn't understand that salmonella was something that could actually grow in that material. And we were doing our surveillance testing and found a positive for salmonella because again on their end there was basically the root cause was post process handling of the material and lack of understanding of the requirements for that material. And so, making sure that's where you get to the HACCP and the food safety program of making sure that the supplier understands it, especially where, post-processing, post-handling of the material, especially when you're using it in a finished good where there's no further processing or further kill step, is absolutely critical that they understand the food safety requirements. And so in this case, we obviously spent a lot of time with supplier on corrective actions. They put a number of things in place for their post-process handling of the material. And then we also went to enhanced micro testing until they were able to demonstrate compliance to that. But you want to make sure your suppliers understand the micro requirements that you need for your particular application, and that they understand, how to, especially post-processing. Even if there's a kill step, you can still have contamination post-processing. Another one is identity failure, and I mentioned food fraud before. We made a lot of vitamin, mineral, botanical premixes in my previous organization, and you would see some botanicals, some unique materials, some that I can't even pronounce the names of, that are used in a lot of dietary supplements. And again, these are high-priced materials from many countries in the world where the supply chains are very immature, and there's a lot of potential for fraud. And so we were doing a number of identity and purity tests, and found that in one case we couldn't identify that the material was coming in was pure, and that it was all of what it said it was supposed to be. So making sure that you understand the entire supply chain for some of these higher risk, higher priced ingredients is going to be key in understanding, do you have to do some additional testing on your end? What sort of identification or purity, whether it's HPTLC or FTIR, what do you need to do to make sure that the materials you're getting are what they say they are, so that you're not dealing with potential fraud in your supply chain. Another one is foreign material. This is probably one that everyone on the phone call has dealt with in their past. And foreign material and a raw material is something that it's never fun when it occurs. But does the supplier have the right foreign material controls in their end? Do they have metal detectors or magnets? Do they have sieves and screens? Depending on the type of material they have. Do they have filters if it's a liquid? Are they controlling foreign materials on their end? And then vice versa, on your incoming receiving end, what do you do to mitigate foreign material? But this is definitely something that continues to be a challenge in the industry. Even at my current organization, there's been a couple where we found metal in some raw materials, plastic pieces of belt. So making sure that it's not just having a metal detector or magnet, but it's also having a program that, do you have a pre-operation inspection or even a post-op inspection of your line to make sure that there's nothing amiss? That's something we're pushing in our own internal factories at Hearthside to make sure that we're verifying that the line is still intact after we've run, to make sure there's not belt pieces that are missing or anything that could potentially get into the finished good and cause an issue. But foreign material is definitely one that you will continue to be challenged with, and one that you need to make sure that your suppliers also have the right preventative controls in place. And finally, packaging with the incorrect information. And this could come from any source, but definitely, we make a lot of finished goods at Hearthside. And what kind of verification program do you have in place to ensure that the cartons or the film that you're getting has the right information on it? Because again, depending on the finished goods, this could lead to a potential recall if there's an allergen involved. Or it could be a regulatory issue, in some countries, if you have the incorrect information on the packaging. So it's something we've dealt with in the past at Hearthside. And again, going back to that supplier quality management program, do your packaging suppliers have the right programs in place to ensure that they are sending you the right packaging, the right film, the right cartons, the right corrugated, and it has the right information on it? And then going back to that total supply chain management, making sure you have the right process in place as you bring these materials in to verify that you've received the correct packaging. So these are just a couple examples. I have others, and I'm sure everyone on the phone does. But again, really just demonstrates the importance on each step of that supply chain management in a couple of the different areas, micro, chemical, foreign material, physical, where you need to make sure that the preventative controls are in place with your suppliers. Obviously you do it for yourself, but making sure that your suppliers also have those same programs in place is going to be important for your food safety program. So what are the implications for not having a strong supplier quality program? I think a straightforward one is you're going to have service and availability issues. If a raw material supplier, sends you something with, let's say you have a micro hit, or you discover a foreign material. Well, now you could potentially be out of that raw material and run into service issues. Potential food safety issue leading to a recall. Again, this has happened in my past, and there's nothing worse than being involved with a recall. I think anyone who's been involved with those can attest to that. But if you don't have a strong supplier quality program, you could eventually lead to a recall if you have a micro or allergen issue or a labeling issue. Compliance to the foreign supplier verification program. Now more than ever, the FDA is looking at the foreign suppliers and how are we doing the controls, we as companies here in the US, managing those suppliers that are coming into the US. What are we doing to meet the foreign supplier verification program regulations and rules? And so that if you don't have a strong supplier quality program, you're at risk if the FDA comes in and you don't have all of those risk mitigation in place. And a lot of things I've already mentioned will form part of your food safety plan and your preventive controls plan to meet the requirements of the foreign supplier verification program. Meeting your food safety plan and preventive controls, that kind of flows from that. Once you set up your food safety plan and your preventive controls, I gave the example of us making, nutrition bars, again, where there's no further processing or no kill step, a lot of the preventive controls and food safety requirements are back on that supply base and making sure that they're meeting the requirements that you need. And so if you don't have a strong program in place, it could lead to issues and you not being in compliance with your program. And finally, FDA engagement with your sites. As the FDA visits many factories, if you don't have a strong supplier quality program, I can guarantee they're going to ask about your supplier quality program. Having had the pleasure of having FDA on site before, I can tell you they'll ask about your supplier quality program and what are you doing to manage your suppliers, to minimize risk, and then to ensure high quality, safe product. So again, these are just some of the implications. Again, there's financial implications as well if you don't have a strong supplier quality program, but just wanted to share some of the thoughts today. And I think, Paul, that's my last slide, even though I will say one more thing before I go. And that's really, the supplier quality program is absolutely imperative, but it starts with the leadership. And I mentioned that earlier with Paul's question. And to me, quality is really about a mindset. It's not a function. And you really need to have a strong quality culture to really drive this home in your organization. And for me, there's kind of 4 key areas. You need to have a clear sense of purpose. Is quality and food safety the top priority or the second priority after people safety in your organization? If it's not, you need to ask why. And is there a clear, inspiring vision and plan to get there? Second is engaging leadership. Your leaders have to be visible and they have to engage with people on quality and food safety. Does the plant manager walk the floor? Does the quality manager get out on the shop floor? Do your quality leaders get out to the plants and engage with people and talk about the importance of quality and food safety? Is there a personal responsibility at all levels? I say this all the time to people, you have to make it personal for individuals. And one way of doing that is reminding them their kids, their parents are eating these products that you're manufacturing, and having them understand, would they make that decision, for their kid? Would they serve them something that had a foreign material in it? I think the answer is no, but you want to make it personal for people so that they carry that responsibility and understand the importance of your food safety and quality programs. And then finally, do you have an effective process of continuous improvement? Things are going to happen. We deal with human nature and no one's perfect, but are we taking those learnings when something happens and ensuring that we don't repeat those mistakes? Because shame on us if we don't take advantage of those opportunities to learn and to put the right programs in place to make sure it doesn't happen again. So Paul, I think with that.
Yeah, Peter, I wanted to, if you could just go back one slide, I just wanted to ask one question that I didn't have a chance to.
Sure.
You know, many companies talk about the cost of implications of implementation, but I think it's quite important, especially today, to discuss, as you mentioned, the cost of not doing it. With that, how would you balance the pressure on cost from the business when working with suppliers?
Yeah, it's a good question, but a really tough question. Most companies are in the business of making money. I don't know of any charity food companies out there. There's a few, but most companies are in the business of making money, so there is that pressure. What I would say is this: there are enough examples, and one of the things I do is continuously communicate and educate my senior leadership on what happens when we don't do things right. And as I mentioned earlier, I mean, the key is once you're effective, you can start to look at efficiencies and ways that you can manage and minimize inflationary costs and things like that. But if you're not effective, you could spend millions of dollars in a recall, and that will wipe it out, years of potential savings of any headcount or testing changes that you made, et cetera. So what I do is the key here is continuously educating and informing the leadership on here's examples where we have spent money. I just had one recently where foreign material is going to cost us a couple $100,000. Well, that pays for a lot of headcount. And so if you really continuously educate people on the importance of it, but also specifically the senior leadership, help them understand the importance of why these programs are critical, so that you don't end up in that place where you're costing the company hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars. You have to speak their language. You have to talk in numbers and show them the examples of here's what happens when it isn't done right. And while it's never easy and there's always going to be pressures, I think that those companies have had quality issues where it's been costly, are very sensitive to it, and it's probably a little bit easier of a discussion. But nevertheless, every company's under pressure financially, obviously, and you need to just keep educating and informing them. That would be the best course of action.
Okay, great. Thank you. Now, on your next slide there, again, I want to thank you for speaking on culture as well, because it's an equally relevant and important topic and now requirement in our industry. Just before we jump into the Q&A, and I'm sure we have a lot of great questions from the audience, I just want to give a slightly different perspective on supply chain and risk management. So Amy, if you wouldn't mind just flipping to our next slide, or I'm not sure, maybe I have access. Thank you. Because our main featured topic today was supplier quality, I just want to talk a little bit more about considerations for your supplier program and how we as a certification body or your certification body could support your programs potentially. These programs to manage your supplier risk can take several forms with your certification body. It can be a custom first-party audit protocol that maybe you've written or developed, or it could be a second-party program that a certification body has written and developed, like a GMP or a HACCP, or food safety audit that they may have, or it could even be a combination of both. So just let me move here on the next slide. Okay, so on the screen right now, I just want to bring a couple of things to your attention. I sometimes look at this map here, and I like to add a little bit of humor, saying that this is pretty straightforward and easy to understand. But we all know that this is not accurate at all, and in many cases, it's extremely intricate, and it's very confusing on its best day. The top right, where the cats and dogs are together, the cat's concerned about the risk in front of him without looking at the bigger picture or the risks all around him. This is very accurate, I think, in the real world when you're looking to manage the risk in your supply chain, as Peter mentioned. It's often said that, your suppliers are your greatest risk to your business, and I believe that to be true. It's also critical when you're looking at the risk in your business that you do so with a much larger lens than just food safety. So you want to consider the bigger picture. Now, moving to the next slide here, many times when I first speak with my customers about their supplier program, usually the discussions are sometimes narrow in scope. So in other words, we're focused on just food safety, but there are many areas of risk that a supplier can impose on your business today that maybe you haven't considered as a part of that protocol. As an example, do they have a solid understanding of your expectations? Do they have a management approach that's complementary to yours? Do they have the capacity to manage your business as a sole supplier? Or what about their social responsibility, environmental, health and safety, or other concerns like financial stability, as Peter mentioned? There's nothing wrong with focusing your supplier program on GMPs, food safety, or quality. But when I'm speaking with my customers, I always want to be sure that they're aware we can go much deeper, and oftentimes should. So taking a look at next slide here, Amy, if you don't mind. This is just a sample of some of the additional questions that we could include around management approach to ensure that they're a good fit for your business. Consider audit questions that include, the future vision of your suppliers and if it's complementary to yours, or what changes are they making or have they made in their environment to support your growth? Can they handle your capacity requirements? Do they have appropriate controls in place, and how are they managing things like business continuity planning? I mean, I don't think too many people expected a global pandemic. How many of your key suppliers had contingency plans in place to address this? And then just finally, the last slide I want to talk about is, Peter mentioned it earlier, is financial stability. So, although this is not often looked at during an audit, in my opinion, it should be, as their stability is critical to, the success of your business and your future growth. Oftentimes, companies will tell me they're not sure how they can collect this type of information, or if their suppliers are financially stable, or it's hard to ask their suppliers to, open their books, as they say, during an audit. And I understand this, but oftentimes companies are not willing to share this type of information. And I think that there's many ways you can skin a cat, as we saw earlier. We can ask pertinent questions of their business that can help us paint a picture of their financial stability. So I hope that this has helped a little bit. Again, a very, very big thank you to Peter for your time. And at this point, thank you all for joining. We're now going to move over, I think, to Q&A with Amy. So thank you.
That's right. Just before we hop into the Q&A, I see a couple questions in that question box. I just wanted to mention we do encourage everyone to take a look at the list of upcoming webinars on our website at pdrfsi.com/webinars. And we hope to see you all in a future session. They're all free to register, so sign up for as many as you'd like. Right, let's see here. All right, Peter. First question, this is a good one. Any suggestions on what to do when suppliers refuse to provide requested documents such as HACCP?
Yeah, well, first of all, see if the refusal is due to their concern about confidentiality. We have a standard two-way confidentiality agreement. That's one way that hopefully alleviates that. If they still won't send it, then you need to ask yourself, well, what is it that, why are they not willing to share? Because to me, food safety is non-competitive. I've always believed that, and that's why I enjoy doing things like this. And because I think we're all better as the collective as we learn from each other. So then you need to, I would say, talk to your procurement organization to say, is there an alternative? Because if someone's really not willing to share their preventative controls, their food safety plans, even if it's in summary format, so you at least understand them, then I would be concerned of what other things are they hiding from you as a customer. But a lot of times the NDA or the confidentiality agreement will help get them to send it to you. But that would be the route I'd go first, and then if not, I would honestly potentially look for an alternative. The third thing you could do is, if they're still not willing and it's an ingredient and like you absolutely need for an application, then what additional testing or incoming material controls are you going to do to manage that supplier?
All right, great. Let's see. Next question is, what are your opinions on systems such as TraceGains for supplier document management?
Yeah, well, we at Hearthside actually use TraceGains. I think it's a good system. I think there are other ones out there. I don't want, this isn't about the system or the tool this session, I'm sure those vendors can do a much better job than myself. But I think a tool or a software like TraceGains really helps facilitate the gathering of all that information. I think each company, depending on your size and the number of suppliers you have, having a simple SharePoint or Excel file could be good enough. But when you get into the hundreds of suppliers or even thousands, as some of the large companies have, some sort of software or tool will be helpful at managing a lot of those requirements. So it's not an absolute necessity for your program, but I think, again, the larger you get as an organization, and really more importantly, how do you keep those documents up to date? And so I think, everyone could do that initial work of gathering the documents that I've talked about, putting them into like a folder on your Outlook or a shared drive or a SharePoint. But the challenge then becomes, how do you know how to update them on a regular basis? And I think that's where one of these software tools can really help you, because it sends out reminders, both internally and externally, to update those documents. So I like them. I'm an advocate. Again, we happen to use one of them that was mentioned, but there are other services out there as well that are just as, I'm sure, appropriate. Did we lose you, Amy?
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. Yeah, I think my headset disconnected for a moment there.
Okay, sure.
I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. I have one more left on the screen. So if there's anyone that had another question, get that in. But this last question, it's kind of more of a request for suggestions here, Peter. They're looking for suggestions of first steps, especially in a case for looking for more, C-suite buy-in. Are there any resources you can point them towards, or suggested first steps for improving the supplier quality management program?
Yeah, yeah, it's another great question. I mean, I think one thing I would definitely suggest is partner with your supply chain leader and or your procurement leader, because I think when you go to the C-suite and you ask for support, resources, et cetera, to manage your supplier quality program, it's a lot easy to say no to one person, but when you have three, let's say, leaders from the various functions who are there asking for that level of support, I think it shows the collective power of not only that organization, but that you're going with one voice and asking for that support. So, I always partner with my procurement lead when we're asking for support on specific supplier quality management questions. And in fact, we're doing something soon on this with the chief operating officer. So, I mean, that would be my first suggestion: is get other supporters in the organization who can help sort of lift you up and be there by your side as you ask for that C-level buy-in. And then the other thing, as I mentioned earlier, is just continue to educate and inform your leaders on. I always share when I see an issue of a recall or something serious related to something that happened in the industry related to a supplier. I always make sure I share the news link, because I want to keep informing and reminding my leadership of the costs of non-compliance, because even when you think it won't happen to you, I can tell you after 27 years it can.
Nothing like the casual CC
Yeah,
on
exactly.
the newsletters industry updates.
Exactly.
All right, fantastic. Well, Peter, thank you so much for joining the webinar. If there were any other folks out there with questions, maybe you didn't feel comfortable asking live on the air, I did include Peter's email address right here on the screen for you. If you have any other general questions about supplier audits or anything like that you need some input on, you're more than welcome to reach out to PGRFSI, and our email address is pretty straightforward. It's just pgrfsi@pgrfsi.com. And we will be sure to get any questions you have to the right people to answer those questions. And once again, Peter, thank you so much for taking the time to join us for this webinar. It's a great content as always, and we really hope to see you on a future webinar.
Absolutely, and happy to answer any questions if people want to email me.
Perfect. Well, thank you to all of our attendees today. We hope to see you on a future webinar, and I hope you have a great rest of your week.